This is DeliveranceMinistry.fm VideoCast number 43. Well, hello again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of DeliveranceMinistry.fm, where we give you proven insights about the demonic realm and deliverance ministry so that you can wage spiritual warfare more effectively. I'm here with my friend and co-host and colleague, Dr. Phil.
Hey, Dr. Don.
Good to have you here as always. We love doing these things.
Yes.
And today we're going to have a topic on one that we actually came in and more than one request this through the input through our website from people who wanted to see this topic talked about. And really, it's about demonic strongholds that we see most frequently in children who have been adopted. Mm-hmm. And as we'll see, many times these children are adopted within the United States, but many times they're adopted from foreign countries too. Right. So it's an important topic. It's one we've gotten grilled on. We've had some experience dealing with some children like that and families like that. So we're going to talk about that. And I think the starting point is to really recognize that just we do counseling and deliverance. People come in here because they see a problem, right? Yeah. They've got a problem in themselves, and if it's with children, they're adopted. They come in here and they're perplexed, right? They say, well, what's wrong with my child? So because they know, well, we've raised them right. We got them at such and such an age, and man, right away we've been seeing these things, right? That's pretty much been the history of things that we've seen, right?
Right, yeah, because they don't know what's going on in their generational bloodline.
Well, and that's the thing. We're going to talk about, this is, there are open doors. We've got a whole series of podcasts about open doors for demonic strongholds. We've talked about different things that we do or are done to us that open doors, and I would certainly encourage you to listen to those other podcasts. And as you think, the thing with children, many times, or adopted children, is you have no idea what's happened to them. So, well, what are some of the issues that we hear most frequently from parents when they bring their child in for adoption?
Well, I think
for adoption.
Yeah,
bring their child in for counseling.
Yeah, I don't need any more, so
right.
I'm done. Generally, they're trying to figure out why the child is either acting out and misbehaving or withdrawing and sinking back. So, oftentimes you'll see a child with anger and defiance issues, and I've seen that often in here with the children that are adopted. There is something that comes in over them that causes them to be angry, whether they don't know who they are or where they belong, or the spirit of insecurity that comes in with that, like, who am I? Who are my original birth parents? But I think a lot of times it manifests in that the insecurity will manifest as a clingy child that won't their mother out of their sight.
What age the age of children we typically see. Obviously there's some things that happen with adults too. And we'll talk about that.
We'll talk
they have
about
an issue
that.
They get with adults, but with kids, what's the typical
I think
time
they start recognizing it about the age of 3 or 4 when they see these things really start to take on their own shape and form. Oftentimes parents will just discount it as the toddlers, the 2-year-old, that sort of thing. But then once they start to develop their own temperament, like at 4, 5, 6 is about when they start to say, okay, we've got some real problems, because they're trying to integrate them into the school system, and they don't want to leave, because they have either separation anxiety, where the child won't let go of the parents because of abandonment issues and different things like that. Or
so it's behavior problems. Sometimes
definitely.
That they see at school or preschool or kindergarten. Is that when they first times they?
I would say so.
Many times they see.
Yeah, because that's where the child is going to have to integrate. And if there's a spirit of rejection, which is pretty large, then that child doesn't easily blend in with other children. And that's when you'll see some of the defiance and the anger that will start to rise up. Other things I've noticed is there tends to be a great deal of spirits of self-pity that want to manipulate a child, that they have a victim temperament where they're going to play you. Mm-hmm.
And they know, I think most parents, typically a child's 3 or 4. I know there's probably different conventional wisdoms on these things, but I'm sure with parents who adopt children, they're told at a certain, the kids find out right at a certain age, or usually when the kids are 3 or 4, the ones that have come in to see us, at least they know that they've been adopted, right? They're not,
Yeah. And you don't see, and the fruit of that later is, the enemy, I think with all of us, uses a spirit of rejection. So with this group, it's a slam dunk because it doesn't take long. It doesn't matter who the child's parents are or what you're doing or how you're bringing them up. It's the enemy that will come in and start to whisper to them at like 7, 8 years old, you weren't wanted, your parents didn't love you, the parents that gave you up for adoption, and that spirit of rejection starts to come in and starts to needle them.
Well, I think we'd probably say it was been there from the get-go.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Especially if they've been adopted for whatever the reason, whatever the dynamics, whether it's economics or whatever, that child was put up for adoption. Let's say in a foreign country, because, that's quite often a lot of the ones that we deal with, but it could be either one, right? The child was, however, not really wanted,
right?
Because whatever the circumstances, their parents put them up for adoption, right? So,
yeah, but I think what happens is it really starts to, at 7, 8 years old, they're hearing the enemy speak to them with things like you're not wanted, you're rejected, and I think that's where it starts to take some ground in the soul, even greater ground by their agreement.
Right. Okay. All right. So once again, it seems to play out anger. That's the thing. And you've certainly had more experience dealing with adopted children than I have. But I can remember in times past where the parents would bring them the child just so much anger. It's like, what's going on here? There's there's temper tantrums, and kids' normal anger gets expressed, but say, man, this is not normal. Most mothers, I think, especially, even if they have other kids or been around other kids, say, wow, this is not normal.
You're right.
This is not just normal.
Well, was it real normal?
Anger.
Was it real normal for me either? I don't know if you remember this, but I had to call you in to my office because the child started to manifest and got underneath the chair with so much anger and refused to come out and wouldn't respond necessarily to his, adoptive parent. But, we used a little manly authority. You were able to coax him out. But yeah, those spirits are tough when they wall up like that. And I would say too,
if they come from foreign countries, right? There's different spiritual dynamics there.
Sure.
There's certain things that happen in any family, or any situation where the child's adopted, but depending on the countries that people have come from, I know we've had some parents adopted kids from Guatemala, and
yeah, in different places, Guatemala, Africa, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
so there's spirits there too that are different than.
Ooh, those territorial spirits are way different than anything that we've seen over here in the United States. So it's culturally very different. But those are ruling territorial spirits over those areas, and you'll see a lot manifest with the children with the occult because they've been under the influence of it and the witchcraft.
Right.
It'll manifest in the office, sure.
And I think the thing we hear from parents that come in, they're so frustrated because they're saying, man, we got this baby. They love, many times they wanted a child. They've gone through hoops to adopt. Yeah. Adopting a child is not a simple deal. And it's a lot of emotional, financial investment that people make. So they get this child, and usually they just love on that child. And and right from the get-go, they weren't abused. And, because that's the thing we always ask, well, seeing these things, well, the child been abused, or, if they've been around where things could have happened. Saying, oh no, man, we have watched these children. So these things are there kind of from the get-go.
Almost day one to get the child. Sure.
And that's such a source of frustration for, so obviously the things we see, like you talked about, is rejection and then abandonment issues, right? Spirits of abandonment that tied in with fear because they were many times, alone, or just different traumas at birth or after birth.
Especially the foreign country children that are adopted. That legal process tends to take a whole lot longer than it would here in the United States. Is pretty seamless, so if it's already set up. But over there, you could be having a child, which is what happened with one of my clients, whose baby was passed around to several different foster homes, in and out of different orphanages for, I think, 2 or 3 months before she could actually get that child released from the system. And there was trauma that happened to that child. Baby was dropped, I don't know, something happened.
Could be abuse of any kind, right? And that's all open doors for torment anywhere in any child.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the foreign country orphanages too, they don't nurture the child. They just put him in a crib, and there's no touching, there's no loving, and you'll see that a lot of times with that. Over here, I've seen it manifest in different people as adults too. That they'll tell me that they were left alone. They were left alone, and they didn't, those first few days, even if something delayed their adoption here in the States, caused a lot of problems for them as well. Because they'll tell you they almost feel like there's a small child still crying inside them when they come in for deliverance. So, yeah, abandonment's big.
And then, of course, there's generational issues. Those are, and we see in general when it talks about open doors for demonic torment, I say historically we've seen that anyway, it's anywhere from maybe a half to 2/3 of the issues people deal with of any birth, right, are generational, right? Things in the bloodline, things in the family, and the issues. So if you know your parents and your birth parents, you can kind of look up your family tree. But if you're adopted, or you're a parent who's adopted children, many times you know very little, if anything. You know next to nothing.
Yeah, there's not much in their adoption papers
in their
about
files.
the parents either.
Well, the good news is, as you've talked about, is what God does know.
Yes.
And so many times when people find their way to our center here, it's, obviously one of our large focuses is on deliverance ministry. And they understand it's spiritual. It's not just all counseling issues. Now, there are counseling things that we help people with in terms of dealing with children in general. But man, if it's demonic, if it's spirits, they're there, and many times they don't know how they got there. And so, our general approach with parents when they come in and bring especially children with deliverance is say, we insist that they, as the spiritual heads of the home, go through deliverance.
Absolutely.
Go first, right?
Yeah,
it
because
starts with that.
Yeah, they've got to know when the children come in and go through deliverance, they've got to know how to war effectively over their child afterwards. And I think for the most part, that's the discipline piece that I put into place after deliverance of a small child. They need to understand that there's a bit of a spiritual battle if they're old enough to be able to do that, and that when their mother or their father corrects them or binds up a spirit afterwards or cancels an assignment over them, they need to know, and their agreement has to shift. And I train the parents on how to do that so that the child knows they're not being yelled at, but they can make the distinction between, okay, this is not me. I'm not coming into, because the kids are generally very repentant after they act out with the anger and the rage like that, and they don't understand why they're acting like that. So yeah, so we can take them through all the binding and the loosing and making the distinction between whether it's spiritual or whether it's behavioral. If you bind it up and it stops, then you're going to know that it's spiritual. And so a lot of the after training on how to keep your children free is designed around them and their agreement, but mostly falls on the parents, because without the parents doing it, then the child has no spiritual head.
Right. So, and that's important, obviously. Yeah. So we're pretty big on that. And so, we talked about, rejection issues, a child not being wanted, they're put up for adoption, maybe abandonment issues, maybe generational curses, things in the bloodline, spirits traveling down through the parents' bloodline and the mothers and the fathers. And then there could be even curses or word curses spoken over that child in general. And once again, these are true of anyone that's born can have these word curses. But once again, in the case of maybe adopted child who, that it could be worse because they weren't planned for. Definitely, for the most part, they weren't wanted.
Right.
And so there's things that could be spoken over those. So those are all potential open doors.
Yeah, even spoken over them in the womb. Like even while they were being carried, like I've seen that even just in general, like children that, miserable mothers that were carrying these children that didn't want to be pregnant. And they'd said, this is miserable. This is horrible. I don't want to be pregnant. So a lot of that rejection comes in over the womb curses. They'll also, like you said, they can travel down through the generational bloodline, come in through the umbilical cord, or they could be spoken over the child after the child is born. Like one of my clients suffered with great sorrow. She was an adult, but she suffered with great sorrow, and she said, there was a delay. There was a delay in the adoption papers, and my guess is the well-meaning caregivers in the hospital while I was in there were just, this is that poor little baby that nobody wanted, and that's how she kind of grew up. Even after she got adopted, the adoptive parents, they could never have children, and then once they got her, as so often it goes, all of a sudden they were able to have their own, and so she was still kind of like the outsider and grew up with that sorrow until we got her in here, and of course we broke it as an adult, and she now walks in tremendous joy. But those things that can be spoken over a baby, you never know. And that was the one where I was taking her through deliverance, and we could literally hear a very small child just weeping as we prayed for her, and so we had to break that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because obviously the person, even especially as an adult, they're not aware of it. There's just there. It's just buried, if you like, deep within their soulish realm. And And so, getting free from those spirits that entered in, even as a child in the womb, that's important, because you can't, if you need deliverance, you can't counsel demons out of people. And people go through counseling and they can read the word and do the word and try to, be obedient. But it's like, man, if those spirits are there, they've got to come out one way or the other. And so, but that does bring up an interesting point, though, because we've talked about this before, that sometimes even by the time the children are in here, maybe they're 4 or 5 years old, many times they've learned how to manipulate their parents, haven't they?
Quickly. I mean, even from the crib. But, you get a mom who has waited to have a baby. And because the deliverance process is the adoption process is not a short process. Generally, these women have waited years before they can get a baby once they've submitted themselves to the adoption process. And so there's a level of desperation that's been in the mom. I think they almost have to go through deliverance for that before they get these children. But that spirit of desperation, says that mother will do absolutely anything for that child.
And it could be the parents too. I mean, it could be the father too, right? It's not.
Sure.
It doesn't always happen. We're not singling out mothers here exclusively to fathers, but it could be either or both of them, right? Just bend over backwards. And
then that child learns how to manipulate really early on, because so
they have no boundaries in their life.
No, and then that's when we come in to try to pray deliverance for a child like that. It can be a little difficult because they're defiant and they refuse, and that refusal will prevent their deliverance. I mean, I got to be honest with you. When the child shuts down and absolutely refuses, it's really all about free will. So it makes deliverance very difficult on that type of anger and defiant issue.
And we have, we do pray deliverance. When I say we, I mean, as a center, you really focus on it sort of much more than I do. But we've done deliverance on children as young as what? 3 or 4 years old. Mm-hmm. And then 4 to 8, we have an approach with kids, and then another kind of a modified approach for children who are a little bit older.
Yeah,
right?
8 to 12.
8 to 12 or
After
so.
that, we consider them an adult.
And do some things. Do some things there.
Right.
So, but that's an important thing. We're all quick to say there's not demons behind every problem in a person's life, and people need help and they need counseling, and say, well, if there's strongholds, if there's spirits there that are working on that child's life, let's get those spirits out. And realize the child does want it. Does need to want it, right?
Yeah, they really do.
You can't drag them in here, and
no,
we've not seen success with that.
No, we haven't, and that's a hard thing for me, because you have these parents that we can identify it, we can see it, we can discern an awful lot from where they came, but the child shuts down and there's a refusal. You can't get very far with that.
And I'd say most of the times, though, because the people who find us are Christian parents, or at least have Christian values, and they're raising the child in the things of God, right? They hear the word. Maybe they've taken them to Sunday school and got some things. And I think at the core, many times, I think their free will, the child maybe wants to please God or doesn't want to be this way, right? Isn't that the norm that you see? And it's like, okay, well, we can work with that, right? And it's like, because, you get asked the questions and say, I don't like behaving like that. I don't like being like this. And sometimes they don't even know why themselves. Isn't that happening?
Absolutely.
So those are, I guess, some of the things we see coming through the door. And once again, we have a process that we take, parents and the children through for deliverance, but maybe just in general, just to, share some of the things that we do and how we deal with these children and things that we do when kids come through the door with these issues.
Well, typically when they come in, of course, first thing we always do is have the parents give us a bit of a background on them. So I have a counseling guideline journal that I send out to the parents so they can give me what they've seen from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, however old they are, and any traumas, anything that they know, anything that could be in the child's background, anything that they've understood about the birth parents, the country of origin, that sort of thing. So I have a bit of a background understanding. Also, I send the parents what I call a child issues sheet, which they can circle some of the things that they've seen. If it's come in with fear in school or fear of animals or nail biting, bedwetting, different kinds of traumas, different things that have set them off, most of it's identified on that sheet. And then when they do come in, I just spend a little time with the child. I like, we have the child and the parent together, and then I like to watch the child for a little while, just just play, let them do whatever they want. Sometimes the parents get a little upset because, the child starts crawling around on the floor. I like to see what they're going to do and how the parents can discipline them. So I give pretty much free rein for that. So we have that first session, which is just an interview type session. And then we'll take depending on the age of the child, we're either going to teach the child about some of the open doors and how to get some of those doors shut so we can get their agreement, and then pray for them. So it's not a really long process. But, there has to be a lot of the things that we go through are what we would go through in our regular counseling session with adults, breaking the any generational things. Can't break any ungodly soul ties with anyone that's handled them. Canceling any word curses, certainly, that's been spoken over them. So we go through all of that, any sin that was done to them or any sin that they did, and forgiveness is huge. I think that's a big piece, even with the little ones. I go into that a lot.
Learn about that, right?
Yeah.
They can learn about forgiveness.
Because that's the one piece of the homework, regardless of age, that I have the children do by themselves, and the parents often assist them, is I just have them make a little list of the people that they're angry at or that have upset them. And then, we go through the implications of, why they need to release them so they're not the ones being harassed. And, generally the parents will take them through that. So then we
need to forgive probably their birth parents, right?
Sure.
They gave them up, and obviously their adoptive parents too, right? That's part of the mix.
Yeah. And any teachers or friends that they have in school that have upset them. And then we'll take them through deliverance. Typically with a child, though, it's only, depending on the age. I mean, little ones, it could be like 15, 20 minutes. As you get a little bit older, it could be 30, and even older than that, it could be closer to an hour. But it's not, they don't have the attention span. So we try to be very specific and then move on. And then, so we take them through deliverance, and then we have to teach the parents proper boundaries. How to keep these spirits from remanifesting, and a lot of that's.
Well, sometimes tied into discipline. Do we talk about boundaries? But it's like, it's
discipline.
Isn't a lot of it just discipline?
Follow through.
They're just used to want to be that. I think that's a challenge, right? I mean, we typically keep people for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 sessions. But man, when you see somebody who's like, and the child is running the roost, ruling the roost, it's like, man, that's hard, especially like you say, if they're just so overwhelmed with loving the child and just want to be the best mother and the best father, the best friend that child has, and they don't know how to say no.
Right. And again, I've watched that too, because they'll say, well, my child doesn't have any control over this, but I've watched a child just rip a parent right up in the parking lot of our office. And the minute I walked up, she just stopped and just smiled at me. And so I thought, well, see, this is some discipline that needs here.
Well, and these are true. And I mean, here we're focusing some on spirits and adopted children, but obviously, a lot of these can be common. You see when you walk into a store and you can just see who's in charge, the 4-year-old or the 40-year-old parent,
Right.
That's another issue. But I think there is that special dynamic with adoptive parents, because like you say, especially if they've got it from a foreign country, or even if they didn't, it's like, man, they've had to jump through hoops. They've waited, they've spent time, they got a mental and emotional energy invested, and finances invested. So just making that transition. So teaching the parent how to do spiritual warfare over the child, but also hopefully help them to set up some boundaries and do some discipline. And sometimes it's for the first time, right? They haven't learned how to do it.
Yeah. It's the analogy of, like, if you're gonna mow their lawn, like in the book, in the boundaries book, if you're gonna mow their lawn for them every day, they're gonna lay back and let you mow their lawn, right? And the minute you stop mowing their lawn for them, they're gonna kick and scream. So it's the same thing with children. You're gonna make their bed for them every day. You're gonna stop doing some of the things that they're used to, or they've expected you to do, they expected you to react a certain way. They're going to have a bit of a temper tantrum when you start drawing some lines. And that's not necessarily demonic. That's the free will of the child. So
Exactly.
that's all got to be re-straightened out.
Well, you talked about one of the person who's in here was an adult and had some issues from childhood. And so, that they that went through some deliverance because of these adoption issues. But what about some children issues as well? Have you seen some where we dealt with, we had a young girl. I do remember that child. I think you said from Guatemala area who had been, her family had been witchcraft or something. Wasn't it? Her
biological family. We discerned that because of the the area that she was born into over there, and some of the ritual practices that they had with the witchcraft ceremonies were actually done in and around and on her birthday. So when she came in, we had to break any assignment to the day of her birth. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think there was some sort of a festival or some sort of a ritual that went on over there at that time. And I did some research to actually check out the dates of her birth and see, what was going on in Guatemala around then, and found a whole litany of things that were going on that were witchcraft stuff. And then the parents could actually, they were missionaries over there. And I think that you have to be careful with that. I don't think oftentimes a lot of the native people to the land appreciate the missionaries who are coming in and taking their children out, because they did shut down the adoptions out of Guatemala for a period of time, which meant there was some problem there. And, so we had to break any curses over the adoptive parents that were taking the children out, And
by witches or witchcraft curses over them.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, it seemed that they were bringing back artifacts from the area every time they came, like little dolls and things like that from the area. And what they still had the baby blanket that the baby was born into or came home from the hospital with, all these little things. But when I researched it, I found that a lot of the people that were making them over there for the missions people were involved with witchcraft. I mean, some of the fibers that they were using, they actually prayed over. And I can't remember the distinctiveness of it all, but the little dolls that were sent home were dolls that were used for witchcraft over there. So we had to, they looked innocent enough, but a lot of the stuff had infiltrated the house too. So, and this particular child had an obsession with dolls. So, yeah.
Interesting. All right. And then, any other accounts you want to share here as we begin to?
Well, the only other thing that I see an awful lot in the office, it's a bit of a stretch from the adoption piece of it, but it's children, unwanted children that are raised by others. They're not necessarily put into the adoption system, but they're not raised by their birth parents. They're raised by neighbors or other goodwill people that have just taken them in because they've been on the streets. And that's where you see mostly spirits of victimization and a lot of abuse, because there's no protection for these
spiritual
children.
Covering.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, I think it's just, like I say, there's so much uncertainty or unknowns when people adopt children, whether it's, like I say, domestically or foreign country. So there just could be things that are in that child that you have no idea what they were. But the good news is the Lord does know, and with some education, some training, and some deliverance, and some teaching and equipping going forward, the child can be set free, and the parent can be on the path to learning how to do spiritual warfare effectively over the child. So I think, it's as with anything in the gospel, because of the cross, the stuff that happened to us, our original birth, doesn't have to be a life sentence, right? So
exactly.
Kids can be born and raised in horrific conditions, and God can work it together for good. And the more people know and can be trained and equipped in that, and especially take the child through deliverance, it can make a huge difference.
Yeah, because we all have a purpose and a plan, and regardless of how you started, your purpose and your plan is still there. Nothing's missing, nothing's broken, but it could be a little tarnished, and the blood of Jesus Christ is good for getting all things back together and putting you right back in that assignment. So to know what came in at the birth, we want to break any demonic assignments that started at birth, and then reestablish, whatever God shows us as your original purpose here on earth, and speak that over the child and take them through deliverance and set them back on that right course.
Amen. We hope you enjoyed this session, kind of a different session for us. But as I say, we've had some requests on this from different folks, and we know of his interest to some. So if it's not just you, maybe there's somebody else out there that needs to hear this podcast. We hope that you will get it to them. Along that lines, we'd tell you this is part of our deliveranceministry.fm channel, if you like, that we have on iTunes. It's also on our website. You can see a thing on podcasts where we, some number of these that we do on a quite regular basis. So we hope you'll subscribe to us on iTunes. Maybe leave a review for us there. That would be nice. Want to tell you about the resource library. It's been around for a while, but we have a lot of resources. Podcasts like this, articles, slides, videos that have been linked into YouTube. It's all free. You can sign up for that on our counseling our Academy website for the resource library. You get that. It's free. You sign up, you get your email on there, and you have access to all of it. And finally, I want to tell you a little bit about a relatively new program we have called the Warrior Partners page. We have a lot of interest from people who want to help support the ministry. And so there's a provision there on Warrior Partners for one-time or regular giving. You'll see it on the counseling website especially. And the purpose of that is really to help us, twofold, to help us, scholarship to help people who need deliverance, and also to help us invest in resources, materials, and training to produce training materials to train and equip believers in the ministry of deliverance. It takes time, skills, and equipment to produce quality resources and keep them current. So that's part of what the Warrior Partners program does as well. So with that, we'll conclude this podcast. We thank you for listening, and we will be back to you soon with another session on spiritual warfare and deliverance. God bless you.